SledgeHammer Horror Guys. I am Ken Sledge, and let's talk horror. Today, I am joined by the very busy director, writer, and producer, Walter Perez. Walter, how you doing today, man?
Good, man. Just here in quarantine, but making it
Um,
happen.
yeah, I don't know if I want to pronounce this right, but you are the founder of, is it Verloren Productions?
Yes, Verloren. Yeah, it's German for lost.
Okay.
That started a while ago, 10 years ago, actually. It started as a photography site. I do photography. And so I was like, well, I need a name. I don't want to use my name. I want to use like an alias of some sort. And so we were looking at names. The list went on and said, well, let's try something, exotic. And my sister, Kim, suggested, well, why don't you use this word? You know, it was Valkyrie, Verloren, and something. She's like, Verloren, it means lost. And I was like, okay, I like that because I saw it as more of a philosophical kind of term. I was like, well, lost productions or productions, we find people, we try to help people, we're trying to find their way in some shape or form through this industry. That's how and it just stayed. We were like midway, I thought about changing it, but then it just kind of stood. People were like, oh, I like it. So I was like, all right, it's just going
Right.
to stay that way. Mm-hmm.
And Verloren Productions has done a lot. Like you said, you did photography, but there's also been shorts done through there. You've won awards. So happy to have you here, man. This is so cool. So proud of all the work that you've done. Something I want to talk about real quick before we get into your first horror movie, something I'm so excited to talk about. You are the director of the upcoming Into the Night, which is based on the story by Stephen King. So you are now forever cemented in the Stephen King universe. So happy for you. That's such a universe that all of us would be absolutely chomping at the bit to be a part of. And you are now a part of that universe, sir. What can we expect from Into the Night?
I mean, Into the Night is based on the story One for the Road, which is an anthology story. It's part of a trilogy. It's Salem's Lot, which is a novel, and then there's two short stories that follow, which is Jerusalem's Lot, which explains what happens. It's a prequel. And then One for the Road, which is what our film is based on, is the final short story that just tells of what happens after Salem's Lot. So the events of this whole, population dealing with or not dealing with what's going on kind of thing.
Right.
And so that's what interests me. Like when I read the short story, I was like, well, this is really, because I'm from a small town, East LA is a town that's mainly inhabited by, Mexican Americans or first generation. And so, we have our rules just like everyone else. The way we're brought up, the culture, the religion, the beliefs, the mythos behind a lot of stuff. And so, when you like with Salem's Lot, it just spoke out in that way. Like, what if there was something, benevolent going on? And it's like, how do we deal with that?
Yeah.
And so I was just like, okay, let's. But I mean, it's a film that just took us a while to do, from just adapting it, because there was two various interpretations that they were suggested to me. It's like, oh, why don't you modernize it? I was like, I don't want to do that. Like we were suggesting changing it like maybe to the 80s or the 90s time period or even today. And I was like, no. I want to keep it in 78, like 1978. And they're like, well, why? I'm like, well, because technology wasn't available. So, there was no GPS or anything like that. It was all maps and instinct on how you get around a certain venue or avenue kind of place. And so, because that's what it is. It's a story about a man who finds himself in the midst of a storm, and he needs help finding his wife and daughter. And he comes across these two gentlemen who are kind of reluctant. They're like, well, but for obviously many reasons. And it's a kind of a tug and pull between these three characters in trying to accomplish a goal stuff. So, I mean, we did it it was a labor of love more than anything, we invested a lot in it. I worked with close actors who are close friends of mine. We worked with new filmmakers, experienced filmmakers. And so we just meshed up a lot to just make it happen kind of thing. And I've been championing it, Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
and I've been,
dude, I know things right now are super, super crazy with COVID and quarantine and all that, but it was supposed to come out back in February, we were talking, but because of everything that happened, it got pushed back a little bit. Do we have any idea about when we'll be able to get our hands on it and check it out?
we were talking, we had the whole AMC theatrical deal ready to go through AMC Independent. And we were like planning it, March, 2020. And obviously with what happened, with the pandemic, we had to close it down. The deals were canceled and push to whenever theaters in LA County or New York would open. Because I'm working on trying to get it to the Academy. And so by following the Academy rules of theatrical distribution or even festivals, but right now, since festivals are also out of the picture to a certain extent, I had to just kind of stick my ground with it. And luckily the Academy's been more flexible now with what they want to do or how they want to approach. They're like, oh, okay, well, if you had this deal, let us see the letter. So I presented all my case to them. And so the film is now going to be submitted to them. And hopefully by December 1st, we'll see what happens, whether we have a preview screening somewhere in Los Angeles County or even New York and stuff. Because I was in New York last year, because last year the deadlines for the films, for all short films for academies was in October 1st. So when we were finished, like when I was done cutting the film, when I was like, okay, I'm done, I'm not going to touch it anymore, that was in October. And so the first big screening that we had where we were like, okay, this is it, was in Rochester, New York at the George Eastman Museum.
Oh,
And
nice.
so, yeah, it was a beautiful, beautiful area. I've never been to that side of New York. I've been to the city, but I've never been upstate or more into the wilderness kind of thing. So it felt like I was in some kind of horror movie for a bit. The towns you see in Halloween or even in a Stephen King novel, you're like, oh, ooh, everyone lives together here. I'm not used to that kind of environment.
Right.
Houses that were there since, the 50s or even before me kind of thing. So it was a nice environment. And because the George Eastman Museum, obviously George Eastman, one of the filmmaker pioneers, I just felt like a very good moment. It was a proud moment to have it projected in 4K and have it, Dolby Digital surround sound, and you're just like, wow, and it was a Stephen King night, so it wasn't just me. It was a couple of other filmmakers who had their Stephen King projects on the line, and we all just showcased it. It was two of us that were there, and two of the filmmakers actually were able to be there. The others were absent, but they gave us a Q&A, and so we were able to get up and talk to the audience about the film. And I think that was, yeah, that was the best part, And it was so close because that was October 17 last year. And then on the 24th, we screened it at Warner Brothers. And that was strictly only for upper division production team and the Warner Brothers staff. So that was more private, that was just within me and the staff members at the studio, the people who really supported the film and stuff like that. So we had that screening and we screened it twice in that same time. And we had a Q&A as well. We had section of different audiences. And a lot of people, I think that one really cemented my ability to get another project going. So a lot of people were like, man, this guy is serious. And so that paved the way for the project that I recently shot called Norjack. But that's a whole different ballgame. But that just kind of, people were like, hey, man, I want to work with this guy. This guy seems to be serious about it. And I thought that was really nice, that, it's always hard to answer a question whoa, how did you do that? Or I was like, well, they're like, yeah, I'm a director. What do you want to, how do I get? I was like, well, if you write, produce, and direct, then you have to write, produce, and direct something, anything, the technology is there for you. I think that I'm lucky to have been born in the time frame that I was born in, and to see how it's evolved in regards to how we present films, and that you have the option, as the artist, you have the option of how you want to present your film. Yeah. I personally, with this project, I just, all the time that we invested on it, I was like, I don't want to just throw it up into some platform, I'm not against it, but I was like, what, I shoot movies a certain way because I want them to look a certain way. I want it to feel and sound a certain way. So, I was like, this has to go to theaters. This has those preview screenings and the screens, the two special screens we had, just kind of told us this has to be presented in theaters and stuff. And obviously we weren't counting on this, but as of now, with things kind of sort of opening up in certain areas, I know Orange County is opening up, things like that. So we may push it towards that side of town where we can screen it, or even, throughout the rest of the United States. We just got to see. I think we're going to have to wait after the election year, you know, that way we're
Yeah.
more at ease kind of thing. I was like, okay, let's talk some movie now, because I mean, even with everything that's going on, I think one thing that's been, cemented about being human is that we just move on. We press, we push kind of thing. And I think that as ambitious as everyone is, it's just trying to get your foot in the door. And if the
Mhm.
academy is granting us that opportunity to be like, okay, show us your work. Why not?
Right.
Why not? That's pretty much it. But yeah, man, it's been a wild ride, just making the film. It started off as a dollar short, the baby dollars that Stephen King offers. It's been going on since the 70s. And, I remember I signed an application, I wrote him a letter, sent my dollar, and I was just like, yeah, we wanted to adapt another story first. The Ballad of the Magic Bullet. That's the one I really wanted to do. And I was just like, man, I started adapting it even without permission first. And then, I remember Margaret Sprunghouse. She hit me up. She's like, well, I'm sorry, but this story's been bought. You can adapt it. You have to pick another one. And I was just like, man. And there was different ones. There was Cain Rose Up. There was another one about Sherlock Holmes. There was just a good chunk to choose from. But I was like, well, okay. I was like, well, how do I, what do I shoot? If I couldn't do this one, what else can I shoot that would kind of show what I want to show, kind of thing. So I searched back, to like classic horror, like what I wanted to try out. And then One for the Road popped up. And I was like,
Mhm.
oh, what if we talk, old creatures kind of thing, something gothic almost. And so I was like, all right. And obviously knowing that Salem's Lot has been adapted into a film by, the great Toby Hooper, I was just like, whoa, like how, you always get a little like, oh man, Toby Hooper, like how can you, pay respect to something that's been done,
Mhm.
that, Salem's Lot because of Toby Hooper and Stephen
Right.
King, and so you're like, okay, either the book or the movie, or you don't know any at all. And so that was kind of like where my gray line was like, okay, I can play on that. I can still make it my own, give it my touch, use the material, Stephen King's, imagine his imagination or his universe of how he perceives things, and then give us the old, film horror flex, as they say.
Yeah.
And that's what came up with Into the Night. The title was the first thing that we changed, because I was like, well, One for the Road, I was like, that sounds like it's one of the lines. It's like, you want one for the road, like, a drink of some
Exactly.
sort, to say goodbye kind of thing. So I was like, I want to change it. Because I want to market it. So I was thinking in marketing terms. I was like, so I was thinking like, into the night. And then it was the night. And then I was like, well, they're going into the night. So I was like, oh, Into the Night. And that's how it just stuck. It stuck with the producers, with the 5 producers who have helped me, immensely, even till now with the Academy thing. And they're like, yeah, that's the title, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um,
And
mhm,
that brings you into the night.
mhm,
Like it just grabs
mhm,
your attention.
mhm.
So
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah. That was like, I was like, oh, this is a title that, it's been used before. There was a Jeff Goldblum movie called Into the Night. It came out in '88, I think. So we were number 2 in IMDb. They're like, hey, this title has been used. I was like, hey, I'm using it again. I think Netflix's Into the Night is number 3. So we're like, haha, like, and we're like, we got him on that one.
Right. Well,
um,
Netflix is Into the Night is a series, isn't it?
yeah, it's a series, but because titles are being used, so I think that title came in as 3rd. So it's
Yeah.
1, 2, 3. So we're like, ha, we're a step ahead at this case. Um, and yeah, right now, like when we started, like, it was pretty brass tags. Like I was like, okay, we were bare bone. We're like, okay, well, we have this much money. How do we do it? Because we're not gonna get any help from anyone. Stephen King was like, you got it for $1. You have a year to do it. The rest is on you, kind of thing. So we're like, ooh, okay, So I was thinking about doing like a fundraiser and stuff like that. But, you know, I've never had too much luck with fundraisers. So I was like, okay, well, I don't want to wait around too much because time is of essence, you know. So I was like, okay,
Sure.
let's shoot it now. Let's find some heavy hitters, people with money, people who are willing to invest for something that, you know, I need them to trust me on this kind of thing. And so it wasn't easy, but like, you know, with people talking, a lot of people look me up. They're like, oh, I'm gonna check this guy out. Like, who is he? And I had a previous film that was a crime drama that won a few awards in the festival circuit. And so they're like, okay, well, he seems to be serious about something. And so the next thing was just to sit down with them and talk to them. And I remember the first person who came on board was Mark Mora. Mark was like, he's like, whoa, he's like, you're doing a Stephen King story? I was like, yeah. He's like, well, how did you get it? And I told him how I got it. He's like, man, like, you know, it's always been one of my dreams to be in a Stephen King kind of project. So if there's a part aside from producing, I would like to have it. And I was like, well, let's see what happens. You know, I need you as a producer right now. If perchance there is a part that I can put you in, then we'll see about that. You know, but yeah, because you know when you write it, it's like you see it one way, and then when you have the actors audition and read it, it's like, okay, I'm changing my mind. I'm gonna cast that person because of that and this and that kind of thing. And so, you know, being the two main characters are, you know, people who are over 60. You know, it's a different ball game. You're trying to cast an actor who's older, who's seen more, who's a little more mature, kind of thing. So you're like, okay, you know. So luckily I knew a few actors that I worked with on stage before, and I talked to them. You know, I just sat with them during dinner. I was, hey, you know, I'm doing this project. Would you be interested? And they're like, Stephen King. You know, like, sure. So I think the Stephen King was a selling point on that. You know, they're like, oh yeah, you know. And then like I'm like, don't you want to read the script? I was like, yeah, I'll read it later. You know, just but I'm in. And I was like, okay, cool. So in that really did help. You know, when people heard the name, when they heard the material, they were like, okay, you know, I like it. Now let me read it. Once they've read it, then they're like, okay, you know, I think we can do this. Or some were like, you know, maybe not. This isn't for me. And that's understandable. And so luckily, you know, we had a few people in. I was gonna work with the DP that I was working with, which is my friend Paul. He was originally gonna DP the film, and he was my creative consultant. So we were just talking about it. We were scouting, but then Paul had an accident, and so he became unavailable. And he's like, you know what? He's like, we can wait. And I was like, he's like, nah. I said, don't wait for me. You know, this is gonna take a while. Just shoot the project. You know, find someone else. And so I'm like, okay, cool. So we were looking, you know, looking for DPs, and eventually we found Harut, who was a DP in this picture. And you know, he brought in his like kind of a vision that he wanted to try out, you know, in regards to shots. And so I was like, well, you know, I want to create a vision of isolation. You know, I want big spaces to kind of create that, like, what's going on here, like, why, like, what is this place kind of thing. I wanted to create an atmosphere to the story. And so we got into it, you know, and we started, you know, once we had the cast, we went to the first locations, which were like in Big Bear. We had the bar that we see is located in Long Beach and stuff. And so the funny part was that we were trying to shoot, the first problem that I encountered was that we were trying to shoot a movie that's taking place in the winter, you know, through a thunderstorm in the middle of spring in California. Right. So we're like, Jesus, you know, it was February. I remember February. And it's like, well, man, like the snow is already melting, you know, like we were like, oh, this isn't working kind of thing. So when that happens, you get creative. You know, it's like, you know, a lot of people were concerned. They're like, well, how are we going to do this? How are we going to pull this off? I was like, well, we get creative, you know. There's sound stages. There's places that we can go where we can recreate in a more secluded environment a storm. You know, we can have snow falling. We can do a lot of things. We just got to, you know, think outside the box kind of thing. And I felt that the producers stood by my side because of that, because they were like, oh man, this guy, he doesn't know how to quit. You know, he's like, he's just pushing kind of thing. And, you know, eventually I got the picture across. And you know, when we first saw that first screening at UCLA, I was like, oh man, like I remember it was like 200 people, and the guy Ben Seifert, who's one of the film people there at UCLA, he was like, well, you know, no one's ever seen this film before. You know, you guys are the first people to see it. You know, we have the directors here tonight, and some of the producers are going to talk to you after the film. You know, and they got me up, so I got up to introduce it, and I was nervous. I was just like, man, like, you know, yeah, I was just like, whoo, you know, but I just buckled down and I was like, hey, let's just play it. You know, I can talk about it after kind of thing. So they played it, and like, you know, once the film ended and the people were still sitting there, that's when I was like, okay, we have something here.
Yeah.
Because no one left, no one walked out, you know. Or if they went to the restroom and they came back because they wanted to hear me, like they wanted to hear us talk about it. And
Yeah.
that's when I knew I had something, and I knew that, like, when I saw it in the big screen, that's when I was like, okay, this has to play in theaters. This has to stay in the theater market, because of the investment we put into it, and just all the hard work, you know. And that's when I go back about what we were talking about in regards to the artists having the technology available to them. I think that when I was in film school, I went to film school, you know, I kind of came and went, as they say. And in 2008, we were the last generation of filmmakers to shoot in film. I still have a film that's in 60 millimeter, you know,
Oh,
somewhere,
nice.
somewhere in my archives. You know, it was just, you know, somebody going for a walk, some jazz music playing in the backdrop, you know. And I remember I shot that with a Russian camera, the ones you wind up. So we
Mhm.
shot that. And after that, we went digital. That was the
Yeah.
last year. And I remember my cinematography professor was like, man, like, I have to now I have to teach, like, you know, digital cinematography kind of thing. But I mean, it's the same thing. It's just in digital terms now, how digital reads color kind of thing. But I felt that even before that, like in the early 2000s with Star Wars, Attack of the Clones, when that came out, you know, when George Lucas introduced digital cinema or digital projection, I think that made it easier for the younger crowd to be like, okay, I can shoot a movie, I can edit it at home, I can put pieces together and tell a story, instead of having to worry about buying film and putting it into, you know, a slate, and then having projected, and then film gets it gets worn off too.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the other thing. Our preservation is always difficult. Now, digital preservation is also hard because, you know, when things update, if you don't preserve the film, then the film becomes also obsolete. So
Mhm.
archiving is also difficult in that term. At least with film, although it may wear off, you're always going to have a nice print. All you got to just clean it, you know, project it again, make a duplicate of it, and then you have a new print. Simple as that. With digital, it's always harder because you have to create a proxy to create another copy, and then hopefully that copy will be up to standard, kind of thing.
Right.
So we're getting better at it now with ProRes files and 4K restoration. But, you know, we'll see how that goes from here, because digital films live in a hard drive. They don't live in a film can where it's like, I can put this in a freezer and it's
Yeah.
there forever, you know, unless someone burns it, but it's there forever. Nothing. So, you know, it's like, oh, you know, so with that, it's like, okay, as an artist, as a filmmaker, how do you want to present your film?
Mhm.
So that's the question now. And so you have all these options. You can put it on YouTube, you can put it on Venmo, you can sell it to a streamer, you can stream it, you can put it up yourself, or you can go to the theater. You know, I became a filmmaker because of the love I have for the theater, for the movies, you know,
Sure.
the movies I grew up watching. That surround sound, you know, that picture quality. And it's changed throughout the years, you know. It's gotten better in some aspects. It has worse in others, you know. It just depends on how things get marketed, you know, how films get marketed nowadays. What is it that people want to watch, kind of thing. But I feel that, you know, opinions come and go, but when you have a chance to work at a studio like I have, and to work with the people who make things happen, it changes your thinking. You know, it changes how you perceive things. You know, I remember I had in 2008, I had a moment. I was working at Warner Brothers, and we were talking about screening the film since then. and we're like, okay, well, I'm going to shoot it, and then I want to screen it here. And I remember walking one day. We were going to celebrate the Day of the Deaf with Unidos at Warner, which is an organization dedicated to Hispanic culture. And I was walking through the gardens where the Central Park Cafe is at, and I see this older gentleman walking coming right at me, and I was like, like that swagger. I was like, that looks familiar. Like, who can that be? And it was like, I passed by and I'm like, good morning, sir. He's just like, good morning. And I was like, oh, Jesus Christ. Like, that was Clint Eastwood, like, I was just like, whoa, like, and it hit me because I was like, well, I am in a place, I have the fortune, I guess, to be in a place where I'm surrounded by creatives. I'm surrounded by people who've done it and who keep doing it. Like, Clint, I think he was editing The Mule that year.
Okay.
And so I was just like, whoa, like, this guy is like, 90 years old and he's still doing it,
Still kicking ass too.
Yeah, he doesn't hold back. And so that's where I want to be. That's the kind of level that I want. So that's why I took on the Stephen King project, because I was like, well, I can shoot anything. I can write something and shoot it and see what happens, kind of thing. But I was like, well, why not get a little ambitious? I know it's gonna hurt. It's gonna hurt the wallet. It's gonna maybe crash some egos and stuff like that. But I was like, I'm not getting any younger, and I was like, well, let's do it. I think once we said let's do it, and the train went off the station, that was it. There was no stopping it. And even now, with everything that's going on, we're cautious. Like everything the way that we've been working this film has been online right now with the promotion and the talks about Academy and the festivals, the festivals that it's been on. We just said, okay, like before the pandemic hit, we actually had, we were screened in Italy. We had a presentation in Rome, but we couldn't be there because that's when the pandemic hit. It hit Rome really hard. And so we're like, okay, we can't be there. I couldn't be there. But the film was nominated for 5 awards, and it won Best Supporting Actor. Adrian DeLeon, who plays Booth. Yeah, for Booth, he won the award. And, we were happy about that. We're like, cool,
That's awesome.
And stuff. And so it's been well received, and I'm happy about it. I'm happy, I'm hoping that it goes beyond that kind of thing, because once I was done cutting it and I started presenting it, it belonged to the crowd. Right. It was mine, and it's like your son or your daughter. It's yours, but now it belongs to someone else. Sure. And they will dictate what happens to it going forward. You can step in and be like, okay, I wanted to go here, I wanted to go there, but now it belongs to them. And so, and I'm happy about that, because that's how you get exposure. That's how people know that you're serious. And, I'm a filmmaker, I'm a film director, I'm a producer, I'm a writer, and that's what I want to be and stuff. Sure. So this film has paved that way into the next, year, 2, 5, and whatever comes forward and stuff.
I'm so excited to see it, man. When you get any updates, please let me know so I can update people through all my social media. I'm sure they're going to be just as excited to see it. I mean, like I said, all you got to say is Stephen King, but Mark Mora, he's a great guy. I just had him on the show. He's the one that actually introduced me to you, so love that guy to death. I'm excited to see it. But I do want to get into your first horror movie. We're talking about how into it you are now. I want to know where it started for you. What was the first horror movie that you ever watched?
Man, I mean, it's funny because, like, I was born in 87, and so I remember growing up and having an old black and white TV and just watching, like, snippets. I remember snippets of horror movies like, Chud. I had a copy of Chud on VHS, or, Phantasm or Poltergeist, all these movies, all these classics just coming at you. But never, and I'm like, I only saw portions of them, especially when they were on TV. They were always like edited for content, all that stuff.
Sure.
And I think the first movie I remember watching, I guess horror related, from beginning to end, was in 1992 with Bram Stoker's Dracula, which was directed by Francis Ford Coppola. And I remember watching it, and I was just like, this is interesting. Yeah. I think the visuals were the ones that caught me first. What it was saying, I mean, that eventually came in later, because, as a kid, you're like, okay, well, what the hell are they talking about? Like, who is this guy? I didn't know anything about the history of Dracula going into it. It was just a movie that, like, oh yeah, Dracula, You should watch it. I was like, huh? You know, I was what, 5 years old, 6, going on 6, and I was just like, okay. But it was a very captivating like movie visually, and it at the end it was sad. Like, and
Yeah.
I never understood why I felt sad. You know, and that's what kind of propelled me. Like, okay, well, why am I feeling this way about this movie? What is it about it? And as I grew up, you know, I watched different horror movies, from, you know, cosmic horror to slashers to gothic horror, again, going back to gothic horror. And, you know, understanding that. And then I went back to revisit Dracula, Bram Stoker's, after I read the book too.
Yeah.
And that's was like, okay, you know, it's not my favorite horror movie, but it's one of my favorite movies. You know, my favorite horror movie is The Thing, but
Of course.
we'll get into that after. But yeah, no, when I got to revisit it, I was like, okay, you know, this is different from the book, but it's visually stunning, and it tells a gothic romance in some
Hmm.
sense with horror elements, you know. And Francis Ford Coppola shot it very, you know, very rough kind of thing. You know, there was little CGI, there was little VFX, and even though in the '90s it was a time of VFX, you know, Industrial Light and Magic was about to change the cinema world as we know it, you know, with Jurassic Park kind
Yeah.
of thing. So it was changing, and so to see that film coming out just a year before that, it's like, okay, you know, this is, and a character that's so, you know, ancient. You know, Dracula was written in what, the 1800s,
Yeah.
and so you're like, wow, you know, and it's still, to me, it's the best one. It's the best Dracula adaptation, and there's a lot. You know,
Yeah.
there's the one in, you know, from the 30s with Bela Lugosi, which is a classic. There's Nosferatu, which is a German knockoff, kind of thing, you know. And it's there's been so many interpretations going forward, but I feel that that one, because they changed elements of it, just made it more palpable and just
Sure.
something to like think about and treasure. Like, okay, you know, it moves the audience, and it's violent. You know, it's a violent movie.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
and
it starts off
it's
with her death. I mean, like it
yeah,
starts off with a bang. And
yeah.
that's what I was asking you. Like, there's so many great scenes in this film. I'm
Mhm.
with you. I think this is one of the best Dracula adaptations that there are. Which scene do you think affected you the most?
Off the back, I would say the introduction. I think when what is it, when after she kills herself, you know how she flunks herself in the river. I remember when I saw that in standard. So it was always, it's a different, you know, what is it, pan and scan
Yeah. Yeah.
when you see it. And then when I remember when I saw it in the wide, it's just, you know, when she falls, the angle, it's like the camera just does this kind of thing. It follows her down, and you're like, oh man, like, and it looked real. You know, obviously
Yeah.
now you see, you're like, okay, it's not real. It's just like a bunch of paper mache clouds and stuff. But when you see it the first time, it feels real. You know, her falling into that river. And I think it's just Gary Oldman's performance was what drove that movie and what
Mhm.
captured me. Like, especially that scene where he starts to renounce God. I think that's the scene that just does it for me. You know, because it
It's
explains.
powerful.
It's a powerful scene and explains how far one person can go or would go for, I guess, a loved one in this case.
Mhm.
You know, and if you, I mean, we've all faced loss before. You know, even now, when you think, well, with everything that's going on, and what loss means to people, you know, death and life beyond death, and imagining, you know, being tortured to live so long, you know, because you condemned yourself
Yeah.
to live such a long life. You're like, man, like, because he's evil, you know.
Stabbing that statue and then drinking the
Yeah.
blood, like that to me was just like, what am I going to be watching here?
Yeah, you know, and like if you watch the extended cut of that, it's way bloodier. You know? It's like, you know, like I was like, man, you know, because he's angry. You know,
Yeah.
he's angry, and it's like it's just he pretty much seals his own fate and stuff, and he curses himself. And I thought that was like, wow, you know, it was just something that was real. Because, you know, when we get angry, sometimes we do things like that. We curse things, or we're like, you know, and it's just something that seemed, it was just very powerful and stuff. And then I think, well, now to answer your question, I think the scene that got me to say, okay, this is one of my just top favorite films was the ending. You know, after he ascends to heaven and the ceiling portrait lights up, you know, that they're finally reunited, and I was like, oh man, like That's what I
Yeah.
mean. Where like that kind of gets me like sad because although it's a horror movie, it's a tragic story too. Where
Oh, absolutely.
yeah, where it's like, oh, he lived all this lifetime. As he says, I cross oceans of times to be with you, like all this time to just be like, make almost the same fatal error, and then finally find peace and I guess freedom from whatever agony he's facing. Because living that long, I wouldn't want to do that. To me,
No.
that's like a curse. I think that immortality could be achieved in different ways, but staying in the earth for all that time and seeing everything that he's seen,
Yeah, no.
I don't think I would want that.
No.
And
So
stuff.
when you do think about Bram Stoker's Dracula, what is the first thing that pops in your head when someone starts talking about that film?
The historical, meshing of the film. So like, because when you think Dracula, you're like, oh, Dracula, blood, But then with Francis Ford Coppola's films, you're like, wait a minute, he's mixing it. The writer mixed it up a little bit, where he's like, Vlad the Impaler was a real person. This was a real
Yeah.
crusader, who was killing, Turkish, rebels and anything that was Muslim related. He was impaling them and then making examples of them, saying like, yeah, I'm doing this in the name of God.
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, that's deep. And then it goes into that like morality favor, where a man who was so tied to God, and then he's confronted with tragedy, and he literally turns his back on God.
Yeah.
And that's deep because that happens to a lot of people. I've known people in my life who have lost great things or loved ones, and they turn their back on their faith, whatever that may be. They're just like, I had it, and then they're never the same person again.
Right.
And stuff. And it's interesting to observe and to see, kind of thing. And it makes for obviously exceptional writing, where you think about, because it's a human experience. I think that Dracula is an experience, and
Yeah.
whoever reads it, or even Stephen King, when you read his experience, his book, that's him pouring his soul to you. It's like, okay, it didn't happen to me like this way, but this is something that I went through, and here it
Right.
is, kind of thing. And like, wow, like was it the Dance Macabre, which is pretty much a quasi semi autobiography on Stephen King, where he talks about why he writes the way he does. Like, this is how I see the world. Like with Stephen King, with him, it's about the lost generation. The generation that came after the baby boomers. It's like his thinking is like, we messed up. Like we didn't live up to it. The boomers, well, they're considered to be the greatest generation, right?
Right.
Quote unquote. And so everything that followed is like, everyone's like, oh, but it's because of what was going on too, with the first generation doing or making things happen for everyone else, like, and so he talks about, Vietnam, the Watergate scandal, distrust in our politicians, distrust in journalism, the clarity of things, just how evil people were. Because you're like, oh, the nuclear family, okay, or like a neighborhood of people, who live together. It's like, well, do these people really like each other? What's going on here, kind of thing. What goes on behind closed doors? And
Sure.
I think that's where Stephen got it right, where it's okay, the 50s was the familiar family. Then why is there so many tormented souls? Well, because there was kids or children who were abused, for either verbally, physically, kids abusing one another at school, when kids could walk into a school with a switchblade or like,
Yeah.
a gun, and it's like he captures that. And although it could make someone like younger than us or someone who's PC feel uncomfortable, it's like, well, that's the way it was, man.
That's how it was.
Yeah, it's subjective writing. You can't take it like, oh my God, like, it's hurting me. No. This was written for a timeline or a time period, and it's something that happened, and you can't turn the eye and be like, oh, it didn't happen. It
Yeah.
shouldn't happen. Yeah,
You
it
can't
shouldn't
fight with that.
happen. Yeah, it shouldn't happen, but it's happened. And
Right.
I think that's why, all these stories are so captivating, even today. Like, we talk about things changing and stuff like that. And sure, some things have changed, but there's a reason why we always go back to these stories, to these monsters, quote unquote, because we have monsters of our own now, kind of
Sure.
thing. And it's like, okay, that's why I feel horror remains such a strong genre, such a strong, throughout the generations. Because there's been bad movies, like everything, like there's bad dramas, there's bad horror movies.
Yeah.
But even in that bad stuff, there's something there. There's something like that could have worked, but it wasn't executed properly for whatever reason. Like those early Stephen King movies, they're not all good, but there's elements that just make it like I can't stop watching it because I want to get to that part. Like
I gotta know how it ends.
Yeah, I gotta know like what's gonna happen, kind of thing. Like you look at like Christine. Like when Christine came out, a lot of people were like, well, it's different from the book, da da da. But I was like, well, but it hits a mark in which it's talking about a boy who was bullied, who was abused, and all of a sudden he gets like this power from some sort, a machine in this case, and now he's gonna wreak havoc. That's the point of it, And it's like Stephen King gives you that like ability, like through him, you see the pain or you feel throughout some of the pains and stuff. And I mean, I know it got me through some stuff, because I was like, man, I don't want to do that. Because it's like when you step into that dark force, you let the darkness consume you, kind of thing. And that's something that I feel we all kind of fight. We're all good people. None of us are villains in our stories, even though we may disagree with each other and stuff. And I think at least for horror, that there is some malevolent force that you need to stop or something. Yeah. But even then, it's like, well, is it really that evil, or do I agree with it, kind of thing, And so that's where I feel horror movies have gotten better through time, where it becomes more psychological.
But while we're on that darkness of do I agree or do I disagree, that actually kind of leads into the next question I want to ask you. Which death in Bram Stoker's Dracula affected you the most? We're talking about the darkness of it. Which death in that movie do you think really got you the most?
Like, I mean, a lot of people die, but like, I think, I think his death was probably the most, because we're following his story, and although Lucy dies and like Renfield gets killed and a couple of other like minor characters like Quincy, I think Quincy was the American was an interesting one, close to even Dracula's death, because Quincy just kind of jumped into the picture. He's like, okay, well, I'm here. I don't know anything about this godforsaken country. Like it stinks and it's dark, and now all of a sudden I'm fighting this vampire. Like what are you talking about? Like I don't believe in this gibberish. But he in the movie he takes the final blow. He pretty much ends it for him, kind of thing. And so you're like, damn, like and with him dying, and with all this death that becomes of them, they're like, I think Jonathan has a line where he's like, what monsters have we become, or something like that. So in other words, in fighting this evil, they've killed people in the process too. Even though they were trying to kill Dracula, they killed his assistants, his helpers, other people. They burned places. They've hurt each other, and they lost each other in the process of doing so. And so with Dracula dying,
that's part of the darkness of the story too. The sacrifices that you got to make to conquer evil.
Exactly. And so, and you see that in like a lot of stuff too, where like, okay, you have to fight this, whatever this is, and sometimes you have to cross your boundary and be like, okay, I'm going to break my one rule, and I'm going to have to do this kind of thing. We see it in even like in superheroes, a lot of, like, since superheroes are hot right now, you see that a lot. Not in all of them, but you see it, and when it's well written in depth, you're like, okay, this is where this person is crossing the line, because they're going above and beyond to stop something from happening. And that's where it gets murky, because that happens in real life,
morally.
Yeah, literally, it's like, well, what do I do? Is my next session going to be the right thing to do? And because, people want to see things black and white, because it's easy to see it that way. It's like good, bad, but there's the gray in between. Sure. And we're all in there, and I think that works for all stories. And I think horror has really benefited from this. And even with Dracula, with that adaptation there, you're like, okay, we see it now. We see him as a tragic hero or an anti-hero, someone who was trying to achieve a goal in trying to get his love back. But he knows that the thing that um, I get this from The Great Gatsby. Gatsby was trying to reclaim something that was already gone from him, and so in doing that, he forced things to happen, and they kind of happened, but they went back to the way they were because that past was the past. It
It's
was
done.
gone. It's done. You can't relive it. You can't reclaim it. And so with Dracula, it's like, okay, Elizabeth is dead, you
Hmm.
know, and he cursed himself. Years go on, 400 years pass, and now he sees I guess, reincarnation of her, but it's not her. You
Right.
know, she falls into his trance, and she starts acting like her, but because I feel that he's throwing, I guess he's creating a shade of Elisabetta in her, which isn't the real person.
Right.
So that's why when she snaps out of it, he's like, okay, just end this for me, free me, kind of thing. And that's that, because he, like, his past was behind him, kind of thing,
Hmm.
and it was time to go. And that's what makes it sad and tragic, and also horrifying because of everything that goes on.
That happened. Yeah.
Yeah, all the people that get killed in the process, because that's what happens.
Right. Well, I always end these with the same thing. We talked about how you think it's the best adaptation of Dracula, but I
Mhm,
want to get your ranking on it on a scale of 0 to 5 skulls, 0
mhm,
being the worst, five
mhm,
being the best. Where would you
mhm.
rank this movie?
Dracula. I
Yep,
want to
Bram
say
Stoker.
I want to say it's a five skulls. I think that if you haven't seen it, like, for those who haven't seen it, new generations. I mean, my sister, who's 16, she saw it finally completely without cuts, and I think it's a film that everyone should give a chance to. Because if you
Absolutely.
like horror, or if you don't like horror, or if you happen to be interested in vampires, it's one that you should watch. You should watch all of them if you can. Lugosi's Dracula, Christopher Lee's Dracula. Everyone who's ever taken on Dracula has done some justice. But personally, I feel that Francis Ford and Gary Oldman just kind of put the needle on it. It's like, this is it. This is a Dracula to end all Draculas kind of thing. And I'm sure he'll be back. I'm sure
Yeah,
Dracula will come back.
he doesn't stay dead. He doesn't stay dead
You know,
forever.
yeah, maybe like in the next 30 years he'll come back, if not sooner,
Yeah,
in some other
it all
shape or
goes in
form.
cycles, man.
Yeah.
We'll get the werewolf and Frankenstein and Mummy. We'll
Yeah.
get the Universal monsters again.
Yeah, so and that's cool because at least in that sense, and I'm not against it, but in that sense, I feel that it'll give new generations a
Yes,
chance to see it in a new aspect, and then be like, okay, hey, well, I heard that there was an older version of this. I want to check it out, and
check
that
it out.
creates the intensity, because that's what film is.
Hmm.
Film has a great history, and that's something that I always tell people as a filmmaker. If you're a filmmaker, you need to be aware that there's movies of all genres, of all walks of life, not just in Hollywood, but internationally. Give yourself the chance to view as many films as you can, and never disregard them, even if you find them to be, like, you know politically incorrect.
Hmm.
Give it a chance. It's not going to hurt
Yeah,
you. Just watch it to see why it's not PC. Like, okay, well, what happened here? But understand that it was written by someone who maybe had a different viewpoint than you do,
or
and
lived a
that's
different life
fine.
than you did.
Yeah, and that's fine.
Hmm.
It's just the way it is. And it's just, like, my film school was always Hollywood. I grew up watching Hollywood films. The Godfather, Citizen Kane, you know Apocalypse Now, all these,
Sure.
Unforgiven, kind of thing. And so, Nightmare on Elm Street. And so you're like, I always try to stay open to that. And now, I
Right.
mean, we're in a point where now different studios, different production companies are releasing things. Like right now, Blumhouse is the one that's bringing everything back. They're like, oh, we're gonna remake this, we're gonna recreate. I was like, fine, if someone's gonna buy it and pay for it, do your thing, kind of thing. Like, I know, like, with Halloween, we got Michael back,
Yeah.
and it was well done. I'm looking forward to what's gonna happen, but I don't disregard everything that came before that. Halloween,
Sure.
Halloween 2, Halloween 3, Halloween 4, 5, 6. The Curse of Michael Myers, H2O. you know, like Halloween is basically H2O on steroids.
Yeah.
But you know, it's like one of those like, okay, uh, but I get what they're trying to do, you know, and
Mhm.
stuff. But yeah, I mean, Dracula was one of those. But for the record, one of my favorite horror movies, like now that I'm older, is The Thing, John
Yeah.
Carpenter's, which was one of the inspirations behind Into the Night. Um, you know, Into the Night was really influenced by that film. And I mean, Bram Stoker's in regards to some of the visuals that you can see that we attempted, but I feel that with the character driven piece that it is, I felt that The
Mhm.
Thing really helped us in that, because that's what The Thing is. Although it's
Well,
costume
I think The
horror.
Thing is the best practical effects movie of all time.
Oh yeah, yeah. You know, but it is, and also it has a really rich story in which it's like these guys who are like, what's going on? You know, like
Right.
they don't know how to deal with it. They don't know how to protect each other from it. They don't know, you know, and that ending is just, you know, it's chef's kiss. You know, it's amazing. It's
Yeah.
like one of the best endings I've ever seen in a horror movie, because
Mhm.
it's just vague. It's like, okay, well, you know, how do you kill the unkillable? You know,
Right.
kind of thing. And so, and that's okay. Like, you know, I always tell people it's okay to end on a low. You know, you don't have to end on a high where it's like, oh yeah, we won. You know,
Life's
sometimes
not
you,
like that.
yeah, sometimes you don't win, you lose.
Right.
You know, and so I think that's where horror, that's where you distinguish yourself in regards to as a filmmaker, the horror genre and things like that. So with Into the Night, I was given that opportunity to bring to life the stories from one of my favorite authors growing up, and just you know, and to do it while he was still alive, kind of
Right.
thing. You know, I think that's what makes it even a, I guess, a more heartwarming experience. You know, that Stephen King is still here with us.
Oh, and
He's still writing. You know, he
he's the
hasn't
man.
quit. You know, and for us to be able to do this while he's here, I think that's awesome. You know, and
Well,
I hope
update
that.
me as soon as you have any type of release date because I got
Mhm.
to get this out there, man. I'm so excited for people to see it.
Yeah,
So don't go anywhere. I got a couple more questions for you.
yeah,
Everybody else, thank you for watching. Remember, keep talking horror, stay what you are, and we'll see you guys soon.